Ramon Sosa is on his way to the Premier League to join Nottingham Forest, and who better to talk about the Paraguayan than Paraguayan expert Ralph Hanna, who has seen him in person for numerous clubs as well as country, and I believe you've spoken to him as well, so we'll definitely dive into that. Ralph, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nathan. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to be able to talk about another Paraguayan heading to the Premier League.
It's been a long, drawn out transfer and it's not quite over the line yet. I think Forest fans are sick of hearing about this one now and they're almost ready just to dive into action and see him on the pitch. It may be a while because he didn't play too much at Copa America, and we all know and we've all seen across Twitter that he's sort of been, well, refusing to play. But we're not here to talk about the rumours. We're here to talk about the player profile. And I've seen him for the last couple of years at Talares, but we're going to dive a little bit further back because you saw him. I don't want to say burst onto the scene, it's cheesy, but you saw him come onto the scene for River Plate in Paraguay before his move to Olimpia. But I just want to focus on that his first year with River Plate and like normally with these players we're not professional scouts as much as we'd love to be, but they can normally see something or something a little bit different when an 18, 19-year-old steps on the pitch in domestic leagues across South America. Was Sosa the same for you? Because it's been a 6-year period before he's been picked up to the Premier League, which, as we were talking about just before the podcast, it's quite unheard of, right?
Yeah, it's a very surprising career trajectory for Ramon Sosa because, I mean, firstly, he's born in a place called Maracanã, which is a great name, of course, because you think about the stadium in Brazil. It is close to the border with Brazil there in Paraguay, but it's a very remote area. And a lot of clubs aren't great at scouting that far away. What they really do is they tell players, look, you need to come to Asuncion and play for us. So whatever happened, the big teams, Olimpia, Cerro, and Libertad, didn't pick up Ramon when he was, say, at under 15s. It's not like a Julio Enciso in Brighton. He was at Libertad from about 13. Guarani had already tried to sign him. So he was, really on the radar. He ends up in this club called Tembetaru, which isn't very well known. They've just been promoted to second division. They're maybe most famous for having produced one player that people will have heard of, which is Nelson Haido Valdez, who ended up in Germany and then had a career in MLS as well and pretty much everywhere. But not really well known. And because he wasn't at a big club, he didn't do a youth level national team either. So he didn't play in the Sudamericanos at under 15s and the 17s. So like you're saying, he wasn't really on the radar of many people. And he almost falls off, I think, at River Plate because he makes his debut for River Plate in 2020, just before the pandemic. So, of course, it's very fortunate for him that he had a pro contract. So when football stopped in Paraguay, which it did for like everywhere in the world, he still was able to train and didn't have to give up and go back and try and make money somewhere else, which, by the way, happened to lots of players in the country. So he's just there. And when you say burst on the scene, it's funny, actually. His biggest, I think, moment in Paraguay was he had a really good game for River Plate around kicking off the 2020 Apertura season. And in the post-match interview, he didn't want to speak Spanish because he was too nervous. So he spoke Guarani, which is the national language in Paraguay. They're officially bilingual. And I think that kind of caused a lot of waves because people are like, oh, this is really cool. He's doing his post-match interview in Guarani, which isn't very common. And I think that just points, by the way, just to start to think about him as a person off the pitch. That shows you a bit of this player that he wasn't confident enough even to speak Spanish when he's first making his debut. But it was very soon that everybody's talking about him because of how well he started to play on the pitch for River Plate.
What was his style like when he first came on the scene for River Plate? Because we all know how much of a technical player he is now and what we've seen across the last couple of seasons at Talares. Did he indicate any of that? I mean, I know he'd strip it back. He was probably a lot more raw at River Plate, but Olimpia came in and saw something and he was quickly on the move there. So what was your thoughts when he first started playing for River Plate?
Yeah, I think what was surprising about him is he's 5'10". So even though he's a technical winger, we think in Paraguay, specifically players that have gone recently like Julio Enciso, Enzo Gonzalez, even Miguel Almiron, he's actually taller than all of them. So seeing him on the wing almost surprised people a bit because you said, oh, he's kind of a bit bigger than our typical player there, but he was very much like the player you're seeing now in the sense of he just wanted to get the ball, isolate a fullback, and go one on one. What maybe he didn't have, and of course what he's building into is more of that all-round play that we can see now. But it was very much that raw, like you were saying, wanting to take on players and run at them. And so it was soon, like you said, that Olimpia pick him up after a season. He's in Olimpia in 2021, and in a way, he was unfortunate because if you look at his underlying numbers, they're not great. But he was actually in a pretty poor Olympia team at the time. They brought in a manager, Sergio Orteman, who's absolute legend for the club, won the Copa Libertadores. But most of his managerial experience had been in lower levels, so it was a very big step up for him. And the team didn't play particularly well as a team, but he was there. Sosa still showing in some individual, I suppose, sparks and flashes the quality he had. And what I really remember is I think it's a game against Táchira in the Copa Libertadores where he had a very good game. He was by far Olympia's best player in that match. And it was seeing him being able to kind of lift his level in the big games that people realized, okay, I think there's something here that he could even kick on. So it's interesting. If you just look at the kind of raw numbers at Olimpia, he didn't have that many goals. He didn't have a huge amount of assists, but in big games, he was putting in those key performances.
I think that's really important for context because any time, especially with Nottingham Forest at the moment being linked with so many South American players and not many people in Europe know about them, they're very quick to jump onto Wikipedia and go, well, 20 games, 1 goal, and we're bringing in a winger here. How is he going to adapt to the Premier League? So I'm glad that you've spoken about that because not many people would have known about Olympia at that time. But I think it's really important that you touch upon the Copa Libertadores and the fact that any young lad who can step up and perform in, say, this is no offence to Olympia and over the last 4 or 5 years, but they're never going to get further than sort of like the quarterfinal stage in the Libertadores. So if he can impress within that tournament, in a really competitive tournament, which obviously a lot of teams put first above like domestic football, great to see that he could do that. And obviously those little moments of trickery or performances on the big stage in the Libertadores earned him that move to Gimnasia. And there again, even before he moved to Talleres, so I'm getting ahead of myself here, but his numbers didn't particularly add up again. It was another stepping stone in the right direction, but something was still catching the eye because it wasn't his goal contributions, was it? It must have been, like you said, that one-on-one play and his ability on the pitch.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I share that with you that at Gimnasia, I didn't feel he kind of blew the league away or did something amazing, and that's probably why he ends up at Talleres and not, say, I don't know, a River Plate or one of the big five. But the really big moment for Gimnasia, let's just go back to what I was saying about when he didn't want to give an interview in Spanish and he only spoke Guarani. Remember, this was this kid from the countryside who had really not had some of that kind of big experience, and then he has the Olympia time where he's not a key player. He was the new signing. He was the new kid. He wasn't, the focus. They still have Roque Santa Cruz, for example, that was the big focus and the leader there. And then at Gimnasia, he's like now thrown living abroad, his first time. He's having to speak, of course, Spanish, no more Guarani now. And it's very funny because he starts adopting an Argentinian accent. So the Argentinian accent is very pronounced, very different to the Paraguayan. And some people started to make fun of him, saying, "What's happened? You move there and you're kind of mimicking the accent." But this was also this first time he's starting to get a bit more presence in front of cameras. He's out of his comfort zone, and so all of these things at Gimnasia, I think, were very important for that kind of adaptation and that, I suppose, starting to mature. But like you said, on the pitch, you still didn't think, okay, this is a guy that's going to be able to go to Europe. At the time, I was thinking when he goes to Talleres, I'm thinking, yeah, he's found his level. He's too good for Paraguay. Maybe he's at his level in Argentina. And then things really take off, I think, in Cordoba.
Yeah, let's talk about that first 12-month period because that was all the question marks around him. If he is to take it to the next level, is that goal contributions he needed? And he drove Talleres to just behind River Plate in that first season and got them back into the Libertadores after a year's absence. And I'm not saying Sosa was responsible purely for that. But his goal contributions above 10, I think it was. Forgive me if I'm wrong there. But all of a sudden, he was the main man. And it's really interesting to hear you say how, yes, he was from the countryside and really shy. But all of a sudden, he scored a couple of goals in the last 12 months from the halfway line. He's the equivalent to Iron Robin, but the mirrored the other side with his trademark finishing now, like in the way he likes to cut in. And when it goes into the top corner, he's made an excellent highlight reel, which has got a lot of Forest fans excited. On occasions, if I am going to put a slight downer on it, he can be overconfident. So this is why it's really interesting to learn from you about his earlier sort of years, how sort of shy he was, because you don't really see that on the pitch anymore. Because if anything, he's sometimes trying a bit too much. When it comes off, it's brilliant. But he's always trying to be the star of the show. And it has worked more often than not. I'm not trying to put a negative spin on it. I'm just intrigued or learning about how confident he has become from where he was. But look, over the last couple of years, he's really grown, hasn't he? And I was probably of a similar opinion of you when he first made that move across, and I was like, okay, yeah, he's made some good appearances here, 1 or 2 goals, but what actually is his level? But his game is just on the trajectory. It's just gone through the roof in the last 18 months, and there's no surprise. Look, Forest weren't the first team linked with him. I think Chelsea are interested, but Chelsea are interested in everyone these days from South America. I think Wolves were very close at one point or had inquired. So it just went to it just go to show. And what was really refreshing, I think, was for Premier League teams to be looking at a player over the age of 21, because I've been fairly fortunate over the last 12 months to speak to several sporting directors across Europe, and they've all said if they're over 21, we don't want to look at them. So clearly, Sosa has shown something worthy of his chance in the Premier League, but it did feel like it was now or never for him. I feel like if Taylor had held on to him for another season, he could have taken that move to the MLS, and we might not have never seen him move to the Premier League.
Yeah, right. I mean, a lot of this with football is so much about taking your opportunities in those moments. You know, while you're hot, you need to make the move. And I think, yeah, you mentioned some of the teams. Everton was another one that we heard about in Paraguay that were seriously interested at one point. And it was because, like we're talking about, it's like this confidence started to grow, and you started to see that on the pitch in terms of him, the goal contributions, but also almost like leading the team. There's a great goal he scores against Belgrano, so that's a classic goal in Cordova, and he just sees the defender. He's like, I'm gonna take this, drop the shoulder, and then he doesn't have much option because he's actually run into trouble, and he shoots and scores from outside the box. Then you mentioned the goal against Independiente when he goes from the halfway line, and this was like, wow, okay, now he's really upped his game, and suddenly everyone was getting interested. What happens as well is it's very interesting the way this happened. Julian Ciso got injured at Brighton, missed most of the season last season. That coincided with the start of the World Cup qualifiers. And so suddenly Ramon Sosa wasn't necessarily going to be a key player, but he's thrown in to start because the way you were describing, sometimes he wants to be the star of the show. He keeps the ball too long. You're almost describing Julian Cesar there. So a very similar player type, and he's thrown into that. And I remember the first game Paraguay played was a 0-0 draw against Peru, and by far the best player was Ramon Sosa. So again, big chat. It wasn't his debut. It wasn't his senior debut. He actually made his senior debut in Miami, which is where I spoke to him. But he didn't say much because he said he didn't want to speak. So this is again before he was that confident person. But here he's starting to show in the qualifiers. So again, we're talking about the key moments, right? The Táchira and Libertadores maybe helped him get to Argentina. Now the World Cup qualifiers got people interested in him. And then it was in January of this year that really I think a lot of clubs were interested, and that's where Talleres and Ramon Sosa came together, and Talleres said, please give us 6 more months of your ability on the pitch, and we're going to let you go in the winter, which is our summer, for now. And so that's why everything came to a head now in terms of him saying, well, I'm not going to play if you're not going to sell me, because they'd had this agreement 6 months ago, because since then he'd just been playing so well. And if we want to just add about these big games again, it's the Copa America. He was again a key player and really pushing. Now Julio Enciso was back in the team, really pushing Miguel Almiron kind of to the sidelines, and it was more like, I think we're going to rely more on Sosa and Enciso than Almiron and Enciso, which is what originally people had thought. He gets an assist against Colombia, setting up Enciso, and he scores his first senior goal against Costa Rica there in Austin, which I was at that game too. And so he's really like just picked up in these big moments, and he's kind of riding the wave of how well he's playing.
You appear to be his good luck charm. Maybe you need to come over to a couple of Forest games and he can start well. I think what's interesting with him coming across to Forest is, and I'm not making excuses for him, but he's not played since Copa America, obviously, with what's been going on, and this deal has been drawn out. So when I say what can Forest fans expect from him from your point of view, it's going to take a bit of time for him to sort of blow off the cobwebs, adjust to life in the Premier League. Obviously, Argentinian football was completely different, but he has dazzled, he has sparkled on the pitch there. And again, like you said, the fact that he could be taking Almiron out of the Paraguay 11, with Almiron potentially on his way out of the Premier League, or he's been linked, hasn't he, throughout the summer, this could be Sosa's opportunity. But before I ask you about that, what I really like about this deal, and I think a lot of people are saying, oh, he's 24. Why is he moving across to the Premier League now? I think you've covered it perfectly there. But I also think it's really refreshing to have a player establish himself in a competitive league and establish himself now with the national team and how he's won the fans over, and going over maybe with that bit more confidence, what he needed. Yes, he's confident on the pitch, but you're telling me it's a different story off it. So maybe coming across at the age of 24 has probably done him a world of good than if a club was going to take a chance on him at the age 21, 22, because we've seen so many players over the years come early and then almost been sent back and then cast as a failure. So I don't think we're going to get that with Sosa. Obviously, I'm a Forest fan. I'm very excited and I think he fits the mould perfectly. But what's your thoughts here on Sosa moving across to the Premier League? Do you think he's ready for this move?
Yeah, I think that the timing point is so key, and the contrast everybody is going to make, of course, is with Brian Ojeda, the other Paraguayan that was at Forest that basically never played a senior game, and that was a case of someone going straight from the Paraguayan league. He was 19. Oh, I'll give you a quick stat actually. Funnily enough, Brian Ojeda and Ramon Sosa played together. They scored their first goals for Olimpia in the same game. So very much a similar time frame. But look how this is almost 2 years later, I think, now that Sosa's making the move. And so those extra 2 years gives him more, I think, of that maturity and a bit more of a finished article. Obviously, different players, different positions, also a different manager. I think it was very difficult for Ojeda coming in. He came in just before Cooper came in, and Steve Cooper hadn't asked for him, and so you could kind of see what was happening,
Yeah.
that he wasn't the right fit. I think here, this is obviously someone that Nuno wants, has gone out there spending a lot of money, so we're really seeing a player, I think, that is wanted by the club. I think he's ready. I think he's taken a lot of the limelight, by the way, at Talleres. So talking about the shyness before, these last 6 months, Talleres use him on social media everywhere because he's always smiling, similar to Almiron, funnily enough. He's always smiling. He's always happy. He's got like this very funny kind of just way about him. So he has been on camera a lot, and all of that, those kind of little building blocks, I think, that he's needed has made him ready to make this jump. And then just one interesting thing about, because he didn't play youth level with a high club like an Olimpia Cerro, he didn't do national team at youth level. Even though he is 24, he doesn't really have some of that burnout that some of the younger players have, because that's also the other issue we see. We see a lot of kids moving at 19, 20, but they've already played so many minutes
Yeah.
that they're almost burnt out by then. Julian Cesar, for example, he debuted at 15 when he was at Liverpool.
And Angelo, who moved across to Chelsea, had 100, 110 appearances for Santos. And I mean, he's been cast aside. But again, that's a completely different topic. I just wanted to drop that one in there to echo your thoughts. Look, I'm a Forest fan and I may be more biased here, but it almost feels like the perfect fit if he is coming across when you look at other Premier League teams. And I always try and take my Forest goggles off for this. But the way in which Forest will line up, we have Callum Hudson-Odoi and Anthony Alango on each wing, who both capable, but they need support. And they had wonderful seasons last season, but they need someone to come in and rotate with them who's going to be on their level. And what both excelled at, really, especially maybe Alanga more so than Hudson-Odoi, is wanting to drop deep, be on the ball, and carry it forward into those dangerous areas, and then either shoot or assist. And I think if you're joining in halfway through the podcast there or halfway through my sentence, we could be describing Sosa, because that's exactly what he likes to do down the left flank. So yes, I know I'm a Forest fan and people may think I'm going to be more biased, but I really do think he can be that excellent ball carrier on that left-hand side. And a team in the Premier League needs to have depth, needs to have 3 or 4 wingers. So I think it's perfect that he's not going to get thrown in straight away. There's 2 established players there who have come through pre-season fit and ready, and Sosa can get up to speed, almost learn from them, because yes, they're young, but they have Premier League experience. And I think that South American contingency, which Forest are building, is a nice environment for Sosa to come in. As a Paraguayan fan, Ralph, are you happy with this move? Have I sold it enough to you there?
Yeah, I think picking up on the South American contingent, that was something that Brian Ojeda didn't have. I tell a quick story that I know he ended up just being like, I don't know where to live and where to stay because I can't speak English and this is really difficult. And of course, there's player liaison officers and everything, but sometimes you just want another Paraguayan or someone else you kind of trust, and he felt he didn't have that. Ramon Sosa has Enzo Gonzalez down the road at Wolves, so Julio and Cisa, they're really good friends. So I was at the Copa America seeing, the players in training. I was in the team hotel at one point. They're together the whole time, and Cisa and Sosa are really good friends. So you can see he's going to come into a much better, I think, environment than Brian Ojeda did. I know I keep making this contrast, but I think it just it seems very apt. And then in terms of where he'll play, I think what you have a great advantage that although he's been a left winger, he's very good on both feet, and you kind of think, yeah, he could come in and cover on the right as well if that was necessary. And I do think as well he's going to be used very much off the bench. He's not going to come in and be a starter. I don't think
Yeah.
he's going to be at that level. He also doesn't have that great defensive work, I would say. So you wouldn't want him. I don't know. You're not going to put him on to protect a 1-0 lead, right? But you might want to start trying him out, or if you need to break a deadlock, I think that's going to be where he becomes very interesting. And just like we talked about, every time he's had to make a move or step up or find a big game, he's kind of overcome that challenge. So now you might see him as a sub for the first 6 months of the year, but who knows? Towards the end of the season, he might have broken his way into the team because he's proved that, and he has that habit of doing that now at 4 different clubs.
I think Forest fans have been very spoilt that their South American recruits, as in Danilo and Murillo, who have come in, have taken like a duck to water, where Sosa may just need a bit more time, but there's plenty to be excited about. Ralph, I really appreciate your time. People who are listening to this, where can they find your excellent work? And now's your chance for a shout out.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. It's been great to talk about Sosa. I'm at Paraguay Ralph on Twitter. We also do a podcast on Paraguayan football in English called Guarani Vision, which we try and do weekly and touch on all these topics and everything going on in the local league as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ralph. Really appreciate your time.